There we go. So here we go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Chilton, and I'm the founder of Namex Organic Mushroom Extracts. Today, I'd like to take you on a tour of the mushroom farms where we grow our mushrooms and just talk a little bit about how mushrooms are cultivated. To start off, let me just say that medicinal mushrooms are primarily wood decomposers. So for this reason, they're mostly grown on wood logs or sawdust, and that's really important to produce the medicinal compounds that we're looking for. So first off, let's just talk about the fungal life cycle, because as you know, as herbalists, it's really important to that everybody knows the plant parts. And for this fungal organism, we start with a spore. The spore germinates into a fine filament called a hypha, and then when these hypha come together, they will fuse and form a network. That network is called mycelium, which is the vegetative body. When conditions are right, they form a hyphal knot, a primordium, pinhead, button, ultimately a mushroom, which will mature and sporulate, and that's where the life cycle is completed. So the three plant parts of a mushroom are spore, mycelium, and mushroom. So mushrooms have spores, they don't have seeds. How do we grow mushrooms then? Well, mushroom seed is actually a live culture of pure mycelium, and we can get that live culture either through germination of spores, or actually take a cutting of a mushroom, a tissue culture, and we'll grow that out in a laboratory, and then that live mycelium is put onto some type of carrier material, which ultimately becomes what we call mushroom spawn. Grain is a very common carrier to make spawn, and the way that works is the grain is soaked with water, filled into plastic bags, sterilized at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, inoculated with a pure culture of mycelium. It is then incubated for a period of generally 14 days. And then once that's fully colonized, we would call that grain spawn, and that is very common in the agaricus industry. Agaricus mushrooms are primarily grown on composted straw. You can see here the light straw in the background, and ultimately what it turns into, and the microorganisms that have been working to break that down, and that's where that heat comes. Agaricus is carried out in shelves in climate-controlled buildings. The compost itself has been colonized with the mycelium. It's cased with a layer of peat moss. The mycelium runs into the peat moss, and then the mushrooms form on top of that peat moss layer. Another type of spawn is called wooden dowel spawn, and that are small dowels that are sterilized. They are inoculated with the mycelium, and that's used primarily for shiitake log cultivation, which is a very traditional way of growing shiitake. These dowels are pounded into small holes in the log. The logs are then incubated for a period of up to 18 months, and then the mushrooms will actually emerge once conditions are right. This is a reishi mushroom house. Each one of those mushrooms is growing on one small wood log, and they are placed in such a way you can see just how even the growth of these mushrooms are. But this is a very common technique used to grow reishi mushrooms. Generally speaking, these mushrooms that we're going to see are farms in China. That's where Namex grows its mushrooms. This is a simple greenhouse covered with shade cloth. And that's very common in China because they're growing the mushrooms according to the ambient temperatures. Another type of spawn is called sawdust spawn, and sawdust spawn is very common. It's basically sawdust sterilized and inoculated with the mycelium. That sawdust spawn gets poked into these small wood logs, which are very common in China for growing multiple different species. Over the next let's just say 6 months. You can see here how that mycelium is starting to move out on that log. Here's a large facility where they are incubating that. Here's another facility where they're incubating the sawdust logs, and this is also where they will be growing the mushrooms. Here's another shiitake farm, and essentially what they're doing is putting these small sawdust logs onto shelves, and then when conditions are right, you'll see small buttons that have formed, and then ultimately turning into very nice shiitake mushrooms. In the shiitake house, it was just really quite a beautiful scene, and the aroma in this shiitake house was just heavenly. Very traditional way of drying shiitake mushrooms, because a large part of the crop is dried for export or storage, is to just dry them out in the sun-dried shiitake. But more and more in China, they are now moving towards forced air dehydration in chambers like this. This is a greenhouse that's growing maitake mushrooms, and again, they're growing it on these sawdust logs. Here shows you the different stages that the maitake goes through, from as it develops to ultimately a stage where it's ready to harvest, like these particular mushrooms here. This is a outdoor farm, and in this farm here, they're growing auricularia, which is also called the wood ear. And here's a harvester of that mushroom. And again, all these mushrooms in China are being grown seasonally, so there's no indoor cultivation where they've got air conditioning, heating, cooling, humidification, all that. This is all grown in a very natural way. This is the tremella. And you can see just how even and regular all of these mushrooms are. So they've been doing a very good job here of growing, and they're getting extremely good yields. This is lion's mane. Here, a harvester is showing me the lion's mane that she has been picking. Here's the basket that she's collecting them in. And here again is a method of actually drying them outdoors. It's really, for me, I think it's all very appropriate technology. There's not a lot of inputs in terms of electricity or other types of machinery. They are slowly going more and more to drying setups that are indoors and with stainless steel like this. Cordyceps, a very interesting mushroom. This is actually Cordyceps sinensis. It's called the caterpillar fungus. Now it's Ophiocordyceps sinensis. Caterpillar will hibernate, and then over the hibernation period, it'll be infected with the cordyceps spores. Up comes the cordyceps in the summer. It's the most expensive herb in China. We don't really have it in our markets, a supplement market, because it's just too expensive, as much as $20,000 a dried kilogram. But now we can actually cultivate cordyceps. So this is Cordyceps militaris, and it's something very new in terms of, it's only started to cultivate this in the last 10 years. And Cordyceps militaris has been used interchangeably with Cordyceps sinensis. Here's a growing room for it. It grows in these plastic tubs. It's a really beautiful mushroom. This is also used as food as well as for supplement use. So this is just kind of an overview how mushrooms are cultivated. We can start with mushroom spores, mushroom tissue. We get a pure mycelium culture. That culture we will then put onto sterilized dowels, sterilized grain, or sterilized sawdust, and then that spawn will then be inoculated into what we call our substrate, which may be a sawdust or a wood log or a compost, and ultimately we will get mushrooms. So the key point for me is that Namix produces mushrooms naturally. We put them on natural substrates that they normally grow on, which has as the precursors to produce the medicinal compounds. Our mushrooms are never harvested with their substrates. Mushrooms are all harvested by hand, which is why mushrooms are very expensive. Mushrooms are high beta glucans and ergosterol. They have no starch. Mushrooms are 100% fungal matter, high in secondary metabolites, and all of our mushrooms are produced in China. And I organized the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China in 1997. So thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed this little show of how we grow our mushrooms.
So did everybody see that, and any questions?
Well, I have a question for you, Jeff, just to share, is that it's amazing how our mushrooms are grown, but can you share with the group the vast differences in how other mushrooms are grown around and really what makes our mushrooms so far superior because of these methods?
Well, first of all, and this is something we'll get into as we move into the next couple segments, Mark, in terms of what's actually produced in the United States that they're calling mushrooms that really aren't mushrooms. But the key here, I think, and the most important part of it is two things. One of which is the mushrooms are actually growing on the natural materials that they would grow on in nature. So, and interestingly enough, most mushrooms are wood decomposers. So it's wood and the precursor compounds that are in the wood that make the difference between a high quality mushroom and just a regular mushroom. But again, you know, I think for me, using traditional organic methods to grow the mushrooms, you know, a lot of mushrooms in this world are grown with pesticides and other chemicals. My company has been certified organic since 1993. I took that to China with me in 1997 and did the first workshop there. I really believe in that. That's very, very important. So organic certification of our mushrooms is something that for me is just a foundation that we have to produce a very high quality mushroom.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Jeff?
I have a question. So I know that you do a lot of the work in China, but then I think I've heard too that we also do work in Russia and Kamchatka Peninsula. And is that where we get our chaga, or is it strictly from China?
You know what? Actually, yeah, the chaga does come from Russia, and you know, chaga is so interesting. It's not a mushroom. It's not mycelium. Chaga is actually what's considered by forestry people in the forestry industry as a canker. It is actually the manifestation of a fungal disease. So any tree that's got a chaga on it has been infected, and that tree will ultimately die a lot earlier than an uninfected tree. But it's just part of the natural course of any forest. There are mushroom species in every forest that have, some of which are pathogens that affect the living trees. Chaga is one of those trees, but yes, we do get it in Russia, and Russia has been harvesting chaga for hundreds of years. They've used it in folk treatments for a number of illnesses. So yeah, and it's very high quality chaga. What's really interesting to me about chaga is back in 2000, I actually imported 2 tons of chaga from Russia into Canada and made an extract out of it, and nobody wanted it. It's like way before the chaga was even known at all in the industry. And let me tell you, it's taken a long time for me to educate the industry about the benefits of mushrooms. And at that point in time, people were just like, chaga, what's chaga? You know, why should we sell it? Nobody's asking for it. So I had to ultimately sit on that extract for a number of years before it actually could be sold, because literally nobody wanted it.
Well, that's not the case anymore, for sure, right, Jeff?
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
All right, great. Any more questions now, or should we, let's go through the next presentation, unless somebody has a question on this? I guess we can save the questions till the end.
Question.
Oh, sure.
So I'm curious, as well as a couple of clients who are interested in Live Ultimate, to understand if in the future, aside from, you know, the pandemic and everything like that, if Live Ultimate has an opportunity to check out, like if our clients and potential customers have a chance to, if they're traveling, check out any of these farms in person, or if there's an opportunity to visit any of these farms just to get a firsthand look, or, you know, with COVID, obviously it's a little challenging in general, but I'm wondering, you know, if COVID wasn't a thing, if these farms would be available to check out.
Well, you know,
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
can I just say that is a possibility at some point down the line. You have to understand that I'm not a tour guide, in the sense of there's a lot of arrangements that have to be made in terms of traveling throughout China and all the rest. But it is something that ultimately Mark and I could work on, and those people that are interested in going and seeing the farms. I mean, the farms in China are amazing, and each different mushroom will have a particular season, but the main season to see the mushrooms growing over there is in November. And that's a good time to travel too, because temperatures are down in the provinces where our mushrooms are being grown. Back in the mountains, really beautiful country. And it, you know, China's such an amazing place. When I'm in China, we travel on high speed trains that are going over 200 miles per hour. It's just an amazing country right now. And having seen the changes since the first time I went there in 1989, it's just phenomenal. My Chinese partners are wonderful people. And you know, you hear a lot of bad things about China, which is really unfortunate, but they've actually, over the last 40 years, the economic transformation has been unbelievable. They've brought 450 million people out of poverty. It's astounding. And people right now in China are better off than they ever have been, and especially the farmers. The farmers were actually the first group in China when they opened things up back in the 80s that prospered, because one of the first things that they did was allowed farmers to produce food and then sell it out on the open market and get the profits from it. So the farmers have done very well, and mushroom farmers especially have done really well in China.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your response.
Yeah, and you know, it's the other thing about China too is that, believe it or not, China produces 85% of the world's mushrooms. Can you even fathom that? I mean, it just, for me, it's just like, oh my God, how is that possible, right? 85% of the world's mushrooms. It's just unbelievable. But again, they are so efficient at what they do, and the mushroom farms are really beautiful, really beautiful.
From the pictures, it looks like that. It's incredible to think in the future that we can see these places in the physical, and it's exciting to think about. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thanks, guys. Jeff, let's continue, and we'll do all the questions at the end, because I know your next section is going to present a lot about the difference between mycelium, and we have a lot of questions I've actually started gathering. So let's keep moving, guys.
Sure. This one right now will be about the actual processing of the mushrooms into extracts.
At Namex, in order to provide a more bioavailable product, we process all of our mushrooms into extract powders. And the first step in this actually is at the farm, where the fresh mushrooms have to be dried, and then they're packed and shipped to the extraction factory. And it's really important the way these mushrooms are actually packed, because there are many microorganisms as well as insects that can get into the mushroom and spoil it. So it has to be kept totally dry, no moisture, and packed so that there's no, and stored where there are no microorganisms that can get in and consume it. For the first thing that happens in this process is we will grind the dried mushrooms, either grind them into a fine powder for extraction, or else into a coarse powder. And that ground mushroom will be fed into this extraction vessel from the tube above in this photo, and then Once the mushrooms are in the vessel, it will be filled with water, and all that water in this extraction facility goes through a very high quality filtering system, which takes out all the impurities of the water. You can see the extraction vessel on the right side of this photo here. The mushrooms will be cooked from 1 to 3 times at 90 degrees Celsius and for 3 hours. In some cases, like with reishi or chaga, we might cook it once with alcohol. Once they've been cooked, the fluid is drawn off to these other tanks where it is concentrated down into a syrup. And once we get it to the right specific gravity, it will be fed to a very large spray dryer. The spray dryer is just a large cyclone with a lot of hot air blowing through it, and the fluid from the top to the very bottom of this spray dryer, the fluid will turn into a very fine powder, and it's collected in this clean room here to make sure that it's totally clean. There's no contaminants in there. And one of the things about the factory too is that there are very large banks of HEPA filters. So all of the air in this factory in the important areas is supplied with very, very clean air, free of microorganisms. And in fact, all throughout the factory, there are various areas where we've got Petri dishes down that are collected on a daily basis just to see whether anything has entered the factory into these spaces and how clean it actually is. Now, the product is collected in these particular bags here. In some cases, what might happen is that it would go into a space where it might be screened, or it could even be reground if there's some coarse areas. And then finally, it will be packaged into generally 1 or 5 kilo packages for shipping. All of that, once it's packed, it is stored here in the warehouse prior to shipping. All of our mushrooms are cultivated deep in the mountains of China, very clean areas. This is the shiitake mushroom temple that is in the mushroom capital of China. A lot of people don't know this, but China grows 85% of the world's mushrooms. And one of the things that you need to realize is that you cannot grow mushrooms in North America and make a profit selling them for supplement use. So no mushrooms are grown in the US and get into the supplement market. This temple is a very special place. On the altar is a statue of Wu Songgong, who is the man who learned how to grow shiitake mushrooms back in the 12th century. I love going to this temple. It's just a beautiful spot and just reminds me of how deep the knowledge and culture is regarding mushrooms in China. Thanks for watching.
So, how do you like that statue there? I love that temple. It's just a beautiful spot, and to see him up there on the altar with a shiitake mushroom in his hand is just really special. And it's a great, beautiful place deep in the mountains again of China. So the next presentation will be more about quality control. And
could I stop you real quick just about that extraction process? We get questions about dual extraction and what's the difference between a raw and extracted mushroom, and that explained that, you know, the polysaccharides are removed through the chitin, you know, through hot water extraction primarily. But can you explain real quickly that, you know, double extraction and triple extraction, these are sometimes buzzwords, right? Marketing jargon, gimmicks. A lot of companies out there, people are asking me for comparisons, and you know, there's a lot of marketing wizardry going on lately.
Yeah, I know that this is something that does come up. Listen, traditionally, mushrooms have been extracted with water, and for most of the mushrooms, that's all you really need, because we're really, and that water will get everything out of those mushrooms that's there. You don't really need alcohol for most of the mushrooms. You do a couple of them. You do reishi, chaga. We will use a one step where we're extracting with alcohol. So you could say those two are dual extracts. And the reason we do that is because they have triterpenoids, which are compounds that are a little bit harder to get out with water, but you can still get them, most of them out with water, but to get everything out, you'll use one step with the alcohol. So really, alcohol extraction is unnecessary. Water extraction will pull out all the compounds. We've got tests that demonstrate this. And so I think you really have to look at it as, again, kind of a marketing idea that, oh, it's a dual, or some companies even go, it's a triple extract or something like that, which is really specious. But bottom line is that unless somebody can show you and demonstrate absolutely with some kind of testing that their dual extract is somehow getting more things out than some of the water extracts that we produce, then fine, show us the data. But the data that we have pretty much demonstrates that we're getting all the compounds out of them that are important. So, and again, water extraction is a standard method that has been used on most herbs in China for centuries, and science has shown is very effective in doing that.
Thank you, Jeff. And are your facilities, where are they located?
Are you familiar with China at all?
Yes.
Zhejiang province.
Okay. Yeah, someone else asked where the farms were. So it's near the farms we have the extraction facilities?
Yes, yes.
And you recently built new ones, I understand, that are coming on at super high production levels that are state of the art.
Well, yes, we have built a new factory over there. Just came on stream in last year in June. It's fully up to speed now. It's capable of producing 500 tons of our extracts per year. And boy, I tell you, we've really needed that because this last year has been very stressful in terms of the demand for the products. So at this point in time, we have pretty much caught up to the demand, and going forward, we're going to have plenty of our products that, and we shouldn't have any back orders at all due to this.
Okay, great. Yeah, and just to Kelsey in the chat, the presentation said there's alcohol extraction only for the hard species like reishi and chaga. The soft tissue is easy to extract, right, Jeff, with the hot water for 3 hours approximately?
Yeah, that's right. 3 hours and at 90 degrees Celsius. And then again, it's, you know, the reishi and the chaga have these triterpenoid compounds that are not present in the other mushrooms. And so it's those compounds that we're really trying to get out with the alcohol. But, you know, remember this too, and this is important. A lot of people will say, oh, gee, a water extract, you don't get out any of these triterpenoids. That's absolutely false, and it's easy to prove, because if you take a reishi mushroom and you boil it up in water and taste it, let me tell you, it'll be very, very bitter. So the water is actually getting it out. What a lot of people are confusing is they think that a water extract gets out only the soluble compounds. Well, that's not exactly true. The water extract will get out the oils as well. The issue is the oils aren't soluble, but it will still extract them. So they are still there with the water extract. So that's kind of what a lot of people are confused about when they say, oh, gee, the water extract can't get out triterpenoids or some of these other compounds. It's just not true.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Okay, now we're going to go into a little quality assurance, and we can take this as slow as you want it. If there's any question as we move along from slide to slide, just definitely let me know, because this, I think, is one of the key parts of our products, and this information here is what's really important for you as ambassadors for Live Ultimate to understand, because there really has not been any quality control in this industry until about 2014, when in fact that's one of the things that I was able to do. Now, let me just make sure. Okay, here we go. So first of all, the problem was, again, that there were no standards. And so people were able to talk about all sorts of things in their products and claim that they were high quality, when in fact they weren't basing that on anything. And you'll still see a lot of companies doing this, but what the scientists have been telling us for a while is that we can standardize on the basis of at least one or two of the main active constituents. And that standardization is not that we're trying to build something up. What we're trying to do is use certain active compounds as markers. Now, getting back to the fungal parts sold as what we call a medicinal mushroom, in China, they actually grow a lot of mycelium, but they do it in liquid fermentation. And so at the end of the process, they actually have pure mycelium. It's not like these products that are sold in the US that are mycelium grown on grain. They actually have pure mycelium. One of the products that they manufacture that way that's very popular is a cordyceps product that they began to produce because the actual caterpillar fungus was so expensive. Here's what they do in the United States. They will grow, and you can see it on the left, they will grow mycelium on sterilized grain in a laboratory. And that process is essentially what we have been using since the 1930s to grow mushroom spawn. Mycelium on a carrier material, in this case grain, has been used as mushroom spawn and developed that way, and it's perfect for inoculating a mushroom bed, but it was never intended to actually be a product that you would consume. And can you imagine, they sell this, it's mostly grain, and they call it mushroom. It is a true bait and switch, because what they're actually selling is tempeh. I'm sure most of you know what tempeh is. Well, tempeh is cooked soybeans with fungal mycelium grown on it. So when you look at that block of tempeh and you cut it open, you see all of the soy there. The white part is mycelium. So when you're eating tempeh, you're actually eating mycelium. But if you were to dry that out, you would see that it's still mostly the soy. So in Asia and traditional Chinese medicine, it is the mushroom that has always been used for medicinal purposes. One of the other parts that is sold is sclerotia, which is an underground, very hardened mass of mycelium. Not many of the mushrooms out there that are utilized as medicinal mushrooms are in this form. One is Poryacoccus, and then chaga. And I talked earlier about this chaga canker. It gets called a mushroom. It gets called a number of things. Technically, that's not correct. There's very little fungal matter in that chaga. It is just this gnarly black mass. Again, it's a canker that grows off of an infected birch tree. There are some people that claim, oh, it is because of the harvesting of chaga, it is threatened. That is absolutely false. And all you have to do is look at the majority of the birch forests out there. They are widespread and massive in the northern hemisphere. So getting a fingerprint, that's what Namex has done. And we base that fingerprint on 5 different compounds. The most important compounds in mushrooms are the 1,3,1,6 beta-D glucans. That is what gives mushrooms their medicinal quality, and that is used for immune system potentiation. And this is important to educate the people that buy your products. Immune system potentiation, it strengthens immunity. And remember, mushrooms are not something that they will take and tomorrow they will say my cold is gone or I feel much better. You have to take this regularly. Think about it as part of your normal health regime. It's there. You should be healthier over time through the years because you're taking this. Get fewer colds, not get the flu. It's kind of like saying, oh, I've been taking this vitamin C, and I took it today, and boy, I feel great the following day or something. You take a lot of vitamins, you don't feel those either. So you're not necessarily going to feel the mushrooms acting as well, but you should see an overall increase in your health. Ergosterol is a compound very similar to our cholesterol. It's present in the mushroom cell membrane, and it is a precursor to vitamin D2, and this is something that this year we will be producing vitamin D2 from mushroom tissue. I'm really excited about this, that we can actually bring vitamin D2 to the market based on our mushrooms. Triterpenoids, anti-tumor, antiviral, they're present in reishi, chaga, a few other of the polypores, very important compounds. Ergothioneine, if you haven't heard about ergothioneine, you will in the coming years. It's a powerful antioxidant found in a lot of our organs. We do not produce it. You can only get it from external sources, and mushrooms contain some of the highest levels of all foods. And then we measure alpha glucans, and alpha glucans are the starches. And so we can tell whether a product is adulterated with starchy materials like grain. And that's why if a company says that their product, that they're measuring polysaccharides, you just have to shake your head, because polysaccharides will measure starch. Starch is a polysaccharide. So a polysaccharide test for a mushroom product is absolutely useless. Now, we use what's called the Megazyme test. This test has revolutionized the quality issues in the mushroom industry. It measures beta glucans and alpha glucans. It's specific to mushrooms. It doesn't measure grain beta glucans. It's accurate, repeatable. It's been peer reviewed. Beta glucans make up 50% of the cell wall of a mushroom or the mycelium. It provides a very clear fingerprint for every species, and the lack of beta glucans will indicate a lack of fungal tissue, and that's really important. If some product is low in beta glucans, then you know there is not any fungal tissue in there, or very little. Mushrooms do not contain starch. They have small amounts of glycogen, so there'll be very little alpha glucan that will show up in our tests. And again, starch indicates the presence of an adulterant. Now, this test was published in the Journal of the AOAC International, which is the organization that sets the standards for testing worldwide. So it is a peer-reviewed method. And in 2016, I presented my fingerprinting method to the International Society for Mushroom Science. And what I demonstrated through all of our testing was that mushrooms will contain between 25 and 66% beta glucans with very, very low amounts of alpha glucans, from 0.1 to 6% of alpha, and that would be glycogen, because that's the storage carbohydrate for mushrooms. Now, when we look at these myceliated grain products, it is exactly the opposite of what you would expect from a mushroom. In these myceliated grain products, 0 to 13% beta glucan and 24 to 70% alpha glucan. So that's the issue with all of these myceliated grain products produced in the US that are masquerading as mushrooms. They are actually mostly starch, because they do not remove the grain from the final product. When it comes to ergosterol, the fungal sterol, actually they measure grain. The big grain producers in the United States will measure, they'll go in and they'll test the grains for the presence of ergosterol, which then tells them that they have a fungal contaminant, because they have to be very careful about fungi moving in and contaminating their grain, because they could end up with some aflatoxins from mycelium. Myceliated grain has, in our test, 1/10 the amount of ergosterol that a mushroom and our extracts have. And that just indicates, again, that there's very little fungal tissue in those products. So when in 2019, I presented my fingerprinting method to the International Medicinal Mushroom Conference in Nantong. And at that point, I had measured 167 samples with a lot more of the myceliated grain products that we have been measuring. And the development of the analytical fingerprint, you can see it right here with 5 of our main species that we are selling. And you can see the beta glucan profile. And again, what's interesting and something to remember, every species will produce a different amount of the beta glucan. And some of these, what we might call mushrooms, like Inonotus, which is the chaga, you can see is very low in beta glucan. And what that indicates, again, is that there's not a lot of fungal tissue in that chaga. But this has allowed us to have this fingerprint for each one of the mushroom species. And this particular fingerprint is based off of the dried mushroom. So the actual raw material, the dried mushroom, which we use for all of our extracts, we have a fingerprint, and we can measure then any extract that we make against that fingerprint to make sure that we have essentially the correct profile and that this meets the standards that we have set. One of the things that you can view as we go through these different mushrooms and the fingerprints, if you look, for example, here down at the myceliated grain, you can see how low it is in beta glucan, 4.5%, 5 different samples, and the amount of alpha glucan, 43% of alpha glucan, whereas the actual chaga itself has less than 1% of alpha glucan. That right there is just an amazing red flag. And I have to tell you, it is shocking when I think that companies will hold up a bag of myceliated grain, which is just a bag of grain spawn, and then say, this is chaga. And then you compare that to a real chaga and you're just like, what are you talking about? Cordyceps has 30% beta glucan. Your myceliated grain in the third row has 2% beta glucan and 57% alpha, whereas the actual dried mushroom or our extract has essentially 2 to 3% alpha glucan. And the reason for this is that cordyceps growing on grain, it doesn't like the grain. It's very slow growing. And so what that means is at the end of the process for these producers of those products, they'll end up with mostly grain starch. Lion's mane, 29%. And one of the things to look at here, and this sort of is what we're after, if you look at row number 1, there's our dried mushroom standard, 30% beta glucan. Our mushroom extract is 32% beta glucan. Alpha glucan, 2% on the dried mushroom, 2% on the mushroom extract. Ergothioneine, higher, interestingly, in the dried mushroom than the mushroom extract. And then the ergosterol is right in line. So we look at this and we say, okay, yes, we are doing the right thing with our extraction. And that's really the key here. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of water extraction. Are we getting out the medicinal compounds? This here demonstrates to us that yes, indeed we are. We're getting the important medicinal compounds out of this mushroom raw material. Reishi, interestingly enough, reishi has one of the highest levels of beta glucan, 50%. Our extract also is at 50%. Alpha is essentially the same. Low amounts in ergothioneine, which is just like with the beta glucan, ergothioneine or even ergosterol will vary from species to species. But in this case, our ergosterol is pretty much in line. But if you look at the myceliated grain, 6% beta glucan, 43% alpha, and very, very low amounts of ergosterol. Tremella, pretty much the same. And then in terms of actual identity, and again, adulteration issues, we use DNA to identify the mushroom species. And look, we get voucher specimens. I visit the farms. I visit the factory. I know what we are using for raw material. I know what we're extracting. Our production partners only extract mushrooms, nothing else. So I know what we have. I know that the DNA analysis is going to come out correct, and it does, but that's what we used for our identity. And this is, here's a certificate of analysis for reishi, and it just shows you down below in the column the number of sequences that they've picked up for the reishi. And what's interesting about DNA is we can also get, it'll also tell us sometimes that we have other fungi present. And in that case, it's interesting to then have them identify those, and they can tell us whether we have any sorts of fungal contaminants that might creep in. And if we want to, we can even ask them to say, okay, can you test for grain as well? And they can show us grain that are in some of these other products. All of this analysis started in my white paper that I published in 2015, where I established our testing method. This has literally changed the industry, and we have exposed the companies that are selling myceliated grain and calling it mushroom of all things. So you'll see a lot of products out there now that actually say no mycelium, no grain, no starch. Can you imagine people that don't eat grains and they're taking what they think is a mushroom supplement when in fact they're mostly consuming grain starch? It's shocking, it's unethical, and this is something that you can be absolutely confident in, that what you are actually selling is a genuine 100% mushroom product.
Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
Thank you, Jeff. That was awesome. I know it's 1 o'clock, but since we have Jeff here, anybody have any questions, comments, anything they want to share?
I got a quick question for you, Jeff.
Sure.
Thank you for that amazing presentation. I was recording it like the whole time. So I was working a market on Wednesday, and someone came up to me. I'm curious to find out if this is true or not. So everything on our Earth is carbon based, and they're saying mushrooms are phosphorus based, and they're saying mushrooms are not even of this planet. And he was saying that, you know, aliens gave them to him as a gift. And I'm curious to hear your take on.
Yeah, let me just say this. You cannot write a science fiction novel that is stranger than what we have on Earth. We have organisms on this planet that are unbelievable. You could not create them in your wildest imaginations. And no, fungi are part of our world. They've been here for hundreds of millions of years. They're part of the natural order out there. So I would just say, well, that's really an interesting idea. But no, I wouldn't consider it to have any validity. But you know what? Look, the world is full of interesting ideas.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. So
that's a great term for it. It's fascinating. Again, it's like science fiction, and I love science fiction. It's great. But like I say, this world is so incredible when the organisms out there that we come across, animal or plant, are just, you know, they're mind-bending in terms of the different species that have been created on this planet. It is just unreal.
And last thing I want to share, we love beta glucan so much, we're naming our next dog beta glucan. So thank you. So thank you for your beta glucan.
We're picking her up in March. I have a question. So your company is called Namex, right? You created that company, and we do business with you because we couldn't find a source of mushrooms in the United States, correct?
Well, I
Yes.
think it's not a question of we found, well, he grows them in China, but he's
Right.
not based in China. That's where the mushrooms are grown. Jeff is based in where, Vancouver? Did I get
Well,
that right?
yeah, in the Vancouver, British Columbia area is where we have our head office. And look, let me just explain that briefly, is that I can grow mushrooms in the US. And look, I spent 10 years growing mushrooms commercially on a very large farm from 1973 to 1983. That's where I sort of started in the mushroom business. I can take my mushrooms to market in the US and I can get, let's just say, $5 a pound for my mushrooms. But supplements are dry, they're dry powders. So mushrooms, like most vegetables, are 90% water. Now that $5, I have to get $50 for that same pound of mushrooms. Have you ever been in the market sometimes and you've seen the little display of little packages of dried mushrooms?
Yeah.
I see those occasionally and I'm like, okay, let's see, 15 grams for $2 or $3. And I'm just like, well, that kind of demonstrates what it's all about. Unless you have an actual Chinatown in your area where you can go in there, they have lots of dried mushrooms of various qualities that they're selling for reasonable pricing. No, you cannot grow mushrooms in the United States for the supplement industry because it's just too expensive.
Well, like you said, mushrooms, the mushroom fruiting bodies. That's why the other companies are using the mycelium, the base, the cheaper part, and calling it a mushroom when
Yes,
it's really not a mushroom at
right.
all.
And look, the key issue there too, remember, they're not selling you mycelium. They're selling you tempeh, dried and ground. So most of what you're getting is the grain that they're growing the mycelium on. And that's the shocker, especially for people that don't want to eat grains. And here they are, they're taking this mushroom product and thinking they're getting a mushroom, when in fact, it's just starch from all of the grains in there with very little fungal tissue.
Amazing. I can feel your passion and your joy emanating throughout the whole presentation. So I am curious about one more thing, if you will. So how did this relationship between, famous Jeff Chilton and Live Ultimate come to be? Like, where is that origin? I'd love to know.
How'd you
Well,
find?
yeah, Brian and I were creating the ultimate elixir. And we were looking to for us, the ultimate elixir was like, what are the ultimate superfoods that need to be in this? And we kept coming across, we were just kind of interviewing top health and nutrition experts, and mushrooms kept popping up. And we're like, all right, well, we got to go and, source the best mushrooms in the world. And we just started digging and digging and researching and researching. And then when we learned about Jeff, I called Jeff up. And I don't know if you remember that one day, Jeff, I just reached out to you. I sent you a message or something. And I said, we want to work with you. We saw you're the best, and we need the best product out there. We want to create the ultimate shroom product. And that was about maybe 3 years ago. And we developed an amazing relationship since then. And I hope this is just the beginning. And Jeff becomes a big part of the future growth and expansion of Live Ultimate.
Yes.
Thank
Jeff,
you.
I have a quick question that I know a lot of people have asked me as the botanist for records on this, and questions about, first of all, third-party testing, second of all, safety of mushrooms. So the first part of the question is, we have third-party lab reports on the beta-glucans, on the alpha-glucans, ergosterol, on the heavy metals, on the organic purity, no heavy metal, no pesticides, no glyphosate. We just want to touch upon that real quick, how heavy metals are a natural part of everything on earth. And, chaga does pick up a little bit more than the organic farms. So that's why there's a little bit higher in one category only, the lead, but everything else is super, super low. And even in the lead category, many superfoods pick up lead, and we're doing the best we can always to monitor, keep them as low as possible. And then the second part being that it's safe. What is your, the safety of taking larger amounts of mushrooms? I know you take 5 to 10 grams of reishi a day. Our product is 3 grams and you get half a gram of reishi. And, we have people asking us about pregnancy, about young children, about dogs, and I've read a lot about dogs and how they benefit from mushrooms. They absolutely benefit from mushrooms, their health. But, So I know it's a kind of a big two-part question. The first part being the purity and the safety, in a sense of, you know, the organic and heavy metal standards out there. And second being, and your assurances that you're doing it the best possible way. And then, you know, fair trade as well. Those are the big three questions I get are fair trade, heavy metal and pesticide, you know, use, and safety for, you know, women and children.
Okay, well, in the first part, first of all of our mushroom extracts will go through the complete testing panel in China before they get shipped. So heavy metals, pesticides, microbiology, they get tested for all of that. And listen, if that gets over to our warehouse in the United States, and then we go ahead and we retest all of that again over here. So we're testing every single batch twice. If it doesn't pass over here, there's a huge problem. And unfortunately, they're not going to get paid for all the raw materials and doing all the extracts and all the rest. So everybody's got basically, it's very important for everybody that all these tests pass. And so again, double testing, let's just call it dual testing, huh? and
third party testing, which we did. We sent you bottles and you sent them off to a third lab, and they, yeah. So
hey, listen,
anyone can test it. A consumer can test it. A customer, anyone can test a bottle. There's labs all over the U.S. Right?
Absolutely, and I really encourage our customers, our wholesale customers, like to go ahead and test them yourselves as well to find out, because you know we stand by all our testing. Again, we test twice, so that's all very important to us. And look, you know what? It's funny because I have seen, like seen other customers or other companies send me a readout on some of their products, and I look at it and go, oh, on the heavy metals, you've got 0,000, and they say, yeah, isn't that great? No heavy metals. And I'm like, no, that's not great. There's something wrong here, because minerals are in everything. You can't have 0 minerals in there unless maybe you have adulterated this with 90% cellulose or some other product. So no, we want to see something there, just like we don't like to see a microbiological panel that goes 0,000 either. I mean, yes, we expect all those microbes to be killed during the process, but you know, having some of them there is a good sign to me, because sometimes, and in the past, what happened is a lot of herbal products got irradiated. They got somehow sterilized. And that's not what I want. I don't want our products to go through something like that. And now you really can't do that in the natural products industry. But there was a time 10 years ago with some of the companies that I sold to wanted me to irradiate the products before we sent it to them. I'm like, come on, really? And for them, it's just like, yeah, that way we don't have to worry about any microbes being in there. I'm just like, oh man, this is horrible. So now, the second part of your question, Brian, was
like, you know, a lot of customers ask us and ambassadors, can you take it multiple times a day? Are there any health hazards for adults? I mean, obviously body weight dependent with everything with dosages, but you know, a 300-pound linebacker can probably take more mushrooms than a, you know, 90-year-old, you know, person. But, you know, you take a lot of reishi, I understand. And what have you seen also with just in general, the health? You know, we talked in the past on calls about allergies. It's very rare, but there's really no major side effects from taking too much mushrooms, is there?
No, there really isn't. And you know, that's one of the beautiful things about the fact that this is a food. Most of these mushrooms, in fact, all of them, I would say, have been used as food. Even when you look at reishi, which is hard as wood, it's used as a tea, which is a food. So food products, they can be consumed in large quantities without having any side effects or issues. Like I tell most people that, for example, even want to eat a new mushroom, I always say, look, some people, 5% might be allergic. Just eat a little bit when you first do it. and see how your body reacts to it. We're all different. So that's another important thing that I think for anybody is like, try it out first and see. But no, mushrooms are very, very safe. We actually just went through a process of GRAS, GRAS, for our concentrated extracts, because a lot of companies are using them as additives to drinks and to foods. And so you have to go through a process, because now it's not just a one-to-one extract like Live Ultimate's got, but now it's concentrated more. It's no longer close to the original raw material. So it has to be generally recognized as safe. We just went through that process with 4 of our extracts: reishi, cordyceps, chaga, and lion's mane, and proved through toxicology and a scientific panel that these were safe. I knew that. You didn't have to convince me, but the scientists on the panel had to go through all of the information out there, the toxicology, any sort of clinical trials and so on, to demonstrate that for us to get this designation as generally recognized as safe. So no, mushrooms and the mushroom extracts are all, I would not worry about them. It's funny because there's really, we had this issue come up the other day with a company that had put our concentrates into some of their alternative drink products, nut milks and things like that. Well, Whole Foods said, well, we're not sure about this, and are they GRAS? And then ultimately it came down to a fact that Whole Foods said, well, how can you prove that a pregnant woman can actually drink this milk, or a child under 2? Well, you really can't, because you can't do a clinical trial with a pregnant woman. I mean, how are you going to do that? Or with an infant, how are you going to do a clinical trial? Give them something that they've never had before. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. So this company ultimately had to work out a deal where it's like, okay, we'll put a label on there. And if you look, a lot of supplements will have labels on there that will say that very same thing. If you're pregnant, you probably shouldn't take this, or children should probably not take these, just as a safety precaution.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question from Jackie Tarleton from Plant Chicks. Go ahead, Jackie.
Hey guys, Jackie. Jeff, thank you so much for your incredible presentation. I learned a ton. And you talked a little bit about vitamin D. So my questions might be directed more towards Live Ultimate. Do we have any vitamin D levels that we can speak of in either the Ultimate Shrooms or the elixir?
Let me first say something about in terms of the product from that Live Ultimate has right now. In order, first of all, mushrooms have very low levels of vitamin D. Period. If somebody says, "Oh, mushrooms are great for vitamin D," that's wrong. They have low levels of vitamin D. But what happens is, our cholesterol, when we're exposed to sunlight, that cholesterol will turn into pre-vitamin D3 in our body. That's how we produce vitamin D. And that's why if we're living in the northern climate, exposure to sunlight is so important for us to get the right amount of vitamin D. And even then, we might not get enough vitamin D, as they've shown through a lot of testing. Well, with mushrooms, if we expose the mushroom powder to UV light, then we can turn the ergosterol in the mushrooms into vitamin D2. And a lot of people say, well, vitamin D2 is not as good as D3. Well, there's a lot of scientific evidence that says, yes, it is just as effective if you're taking it for the long term. So that's really what is going on is we will be producing products that have been exposed to UV and have produced high levels of vitamin D2, and we will be introducing them later on this year. And I know I turned Mark and Brian on to the vitamin D from mushrooms that we're now using that come from a different company. And but ultimately, that's something that we will be offering as well, because we're gearing up to do that right now in our factory.
Awesome, thank you.
Any more questions, guys?
Yeah, I have one. It's more in regard, like, say, for our competitors and the people who are growing their mushrooms on brown rice and grain substrates. What is their like psychology of just like not waiting like a little bit more to actually grow the actual mushroom on there? Is it just like we're gonna do mycelium and that's just so much quicker and cheaper that we're just doing that? Or so like why not just wait a little bit more extra time for those guys to just have a mushroom on the substrate?
Well, the basic issue is that growing mushrooms is expensive. One of the things that I like to tell people is every mushroom you have ever eaten has been picked by hand. Picked by hand. There are no machines to harvest mushrooms. So, like on the farm that I worked on, every single crop, and we had 200 crops a year on this farm, produced 20,000 pounds. We had an army of harvesters that would go in and harvest the mushrooms. And you know, in one a house that had this crop of 20,000 pounds that was came in over a period of, let's say, 6 weeks. Well, there would have been millions of individual mushrooms in that crop. Each one of those, the harvesters in there and pulling out and then taking the base off of it and putting into a basket. And so harvesting the mushrooms, again, makes it very, very expensive. And the way we grow mushrooms in North America, it's the same thing. It's very expensive, very energy intensive, a lot of equipment. It's a very large factory type operation. Nothing like the way we grow our mushrooms in China, which is very sort of organic and down to earth and without all of this air conditioning and heating, cooling, or anything like that. They're actually grown according to the season, so that certain mushrooms like reishi is harvested in September. It loves high temperatures. It's harvested in September. Shiitake, maitake are harvested in November when it's cooler. Lion's mane even later, a month later, because it likes even colder temperatures. But that's really the issue, Michael. It's just that growing mushrooms is expensive. And again, you have to dry those fresh mushrooms out. Whereas growing mycelium on grain is cheap. Anybody can do it. And interesting thing, and what I tell people is, look, if you really want to buy those products, fine, but let me give you a tip, because that little bottle of these products of what is actually grain spawn is going to cost you $30. But if you go to one of these, sometimes one of the same companies, they sell mushroom spawn. So you can buy a bag of mushroom spawn that is 5 pounds wet. You dry it out. Now you have 2.5 pounds. That bag will cost you $30. So you can buy the same product and finish it off at home and have 2.5 pounds for $30. Or instead you can go out and buy it in these bottles for $30 for 60 grams. That's how sort of easy and how inexpensive it is for these companies to produce that product. And it's just an absolute shame that they're selling it out there to an unsuspecting public.
Thank you, Jeff. That was amazing. We really appreciate you and your time today. And I think we'll wrap it up, guys. It's 20 minutes over.
Hey,
And
just
Jeff
two more
gave us-
questions, Mark. Can we allow 2 quick ones?
Okay, but let's make them quick.
Aaron and Tamaya. Go ahead, Aaron, and then Tamaya.
It's
Allie.
actually Allie. So, you know, a lot of companies in the US or wherever, they have, you know, workers, or like there's a lot of fast fashion industries where like the workers are just like really, they're not taken care of. So what do you have to say about like ensuring that our farmers are like really like loved and appreciated and taken care of? And I also had the idea of like, what if we all sent them letters and like expressed our gratitude? You know, thank you, we love our mushrooms so much, thank you for your hard work and your sweat, and your hands like reaped these mushrooms, and now we put them in our bodies, like we're so grateful. So do you have anything to say about the farmers and the workers there?
Oh, yeah, actually, it's so interesting because some of these farms are like at the end of the road, back up in the mountains. These are family farms, and that's what I love about it in China is they have tens of thousands of small farmers. The mushroom crop is one of their crops. They're growing other things. They might have a rice field or other vegetables that they're growing. They are doing very, very well. In fact, I just read something recently that said that the mushroom farmers were doing better than just about any other farmers in China. And again, it's not some big monster company or anything like that. These are all small farmers and families, and everybody is pitching in to work and back in the mountains in these small little communities. And a lot of those farmers have new homes that looks very nice. They're doing very well, and I think it would be kind of a cool thing if we could write some letters at some point and
Yeah. Would it be possible to get a list of first names and then we could each write an individual letter to someone very, very, like quarterly? Is that possible? Or should we just make it out to, no, mushroom farmer?
You know what? Next time I'm over there, if I can ever leave the country here, I will definitely talk to my partners over there, and we'll get some names of the farmers to where that's something that you can do. I think it's kind of cool.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Ellie. And Samaya, you had a quick question?
Hi, Jeff. Thank you for that amazing presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm calling from New Mexico. And I'm wondering, a lot of people here don't really know about mushroom culture, and they just know about psychedelics and microdosing and things like that. Is our product similar to microdosing, all of the different benefits like mentally and for focus and things like that?
Well, first of all, you're not selling psychoactive mushrooms. So other than, we might be able to call lion's mane psychoactive in a sense, in that it does in fact help stimulate the organization and growth of neurons. And so lion's mane is used oftentimes as a nootropic that help with memory and other sort of cognitive issues. And there's some good clinical trials on it, which are very interesting. And look, I have nothing against psychoactive mushrooms. I mean, I learned all about them firsthand in the 60s when I grew up. So, and they're very interesting. And believe it or not, they're now decriminalized in Oregon, which is fascinating in itself. And they have a place, but I don't think that at this point in time, Mark is ready to quite introduce them into the market.
Not quite.
Well, I didn't
That's
mean it
on
like
your own.
that. I just more meant when I bring it up to people down here, they just automatically think that because Colorado recently legalized psychedelic mushrooms. And then people talk about microdosing, I guess, getting the mental benefits for maybe depression or things like that. So I was kind of just trying to segue people away from psychedelics just to use ours because they don't need those.
Right. Well, again, they do eat mushrooms in Mexico, and they do wildcraft for them as well as cultivate them. And so I'm not sure what where consumption per capita is, but I guess that's part of your sales information to talk to them about the benefits of mushrooms and how good they are for people's health. And I basically always suggest to people that they eat mushrooms as well. Fabulous food, very good for you in every way. And I mean, look at me, I'm 100 years old. Do I look pretty good? That's all those mushrooms, I tell you.
I think we have one last question from Shane Taylor.
Yeah, it's not really a question, it's more of a response. And to me, I'm kind of running into the same issue down here with the knowledge of mushrooms and psychoactive mushrooms. So my approach to them is I always ask them, when you hear the words medicinal mushrooms, what do you think about? And a lot of their response is psychoactive mushrooms. And then I just take the company's information and everything I learned about, like cordyceps, reishi, maitake, mushrooms, and I just give them the knowledge. And coming from my personal standpoint, I got diagnosed with a prolactinoma, which is high levels of prolactin due to a pituitary tumor. And the benefits of cordyceps mushrooms and reishi mushrooms on the effect of lowering the oxidative stress and increasing dopamine in the body suppresses the hormone prolactin, which could cause infertility in women, infertility in men, low libido, low hormone, low testosterone, and everything like that. So I ask them pretty much where they stand with the knowledge, because I want to know where they come from, and then give them a different perspective on it as well. And then just I relay my story to them, and it seems to help out a lot.
Well, that brings up something that I'd like to present to you too, and that is we are transitioning right now from talking about medicinal mushrooms, and we're talking more about functional mushrooms. And I think that's something that's important now, because there's a lot of there's a whole category now of functional foods, and in that sense, mushrooms are kind of in that category. So we're going to be talking more about functional mushrooms, and kind of, medicinal mushrooms, they've always been called that, but we're still kind of trapped in a medicine area. And that is something that ultimately, I think, the government doesn't really like calling herbs medicine in that sense, even though they may be. So we talk more about functional mushrooms at this point in time. And I think that's a good thing for everybody to keep in mind, and maybe start to present them in the same way to your customers.
I love that, honestly. And like, I'm actually going to school for functional medicine, and a lot of people,
yes, there you go. And
Exactly.
I think that's what's happening right now is that, and I think it's a good word. I like that. I like
I love that.
Functional. So yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Shane.
Thank you, Mark.
And anyway, Jeff, thanks so much again. You're always amazing, and your knowledge is so deep in this area that I'm just so glad you had a chance to speak to our ambassadors, and they get to know you the way we do. So thank you again, and everyone, thanks for joining this call, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Amazing.
you, Jeff.
Your family.
Thanks,
you
everyone.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thank you.
Go
thank
share the
you.
shrooms, baby.
Thank
Thank
Functional
you.
medicine,
So-
bro. It's functional.
You're such a dad.
I'm a
Happy
dad.
Friday, guys. Thanks, Jeff, again.